Over time, the policy panel has hosted experts around the county to examine some of the best practices in existence for our local municipalities and teach them how to implement to reduce alcohol-related crime and create safer communities. This morning, however, we're fortunate to have a wonderful guest speaker who for over a decade has been at the forefront urging our state lawmakers to pass sound policies to reduce alcohol-related harm. Jorge Castillo serves as the Advocacy Director for the California Alcohol Policy Alliance, also known as CAPA, which you'll hear a lot more about. He also has been very successful working on alcohol policy at a local level, just north of here, for the LA Drug and Alcohol Policy Alliance. He has been working as a community organizer for the past 2 decades, so he has an excellent track record in developing strong community coalitions that have been successful in developing and delivering exceptional media advocacy and policy campaigns. He does this by promoting environmental prevention models, which is the same model our regional alcohol prevention providers use to move our work forward. So enough said, I'd like to introduce Jorge Castillo.
Good morning, everyone. I want to thank the Alcohol Policy Panel for inviting me to speak today, and I would like to thank Eric for coordinating and making this possible. And I have a long history with the Alcohol Policy Panel. Actually, about 8 years ago, when I first started this job at Alcohol Justice, but at the time it was known as Marin Institute, I was sent down here to speak. It was my first year, and I was a rookie, and I didn't know the subject too well, at least the environmental prevention subject. I'd been a substance abuse counselor and a case manager, but I hadn't tackled it in this perspective. And I met some great people here in San Diego 8 years ago, and I see that it's still going on, as you guys are still doing great work. And at the time, and I think it's still true, the Alcohol Policy Panel in San Diego was about a decade ahead of the rest of the state. I studied your work for several years, the campaigns you did to regulate alcohol, advertising, and also access and availability. I also was lucky to be mentored by Jovita Juarez when I first started for a couple of years. She provided me with great insight into organizing in this field. So I'm always happy to come back here and to work with all of you because I see you as a model for change. And I see that hasn't changed yet. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. So we used to be known as Marin Institute. Now we're known as Alcohol Justice. We changed our name a couple of years ago to reflect the kind of work we do. We see alcohol prevention as a social justice issue because it affects so many areas of society. Marin Institute was created in 1987. And some of the great people that you probably know of in the field started it. Marco Sparks, Jim Mosher, David Jernigan were the ones who started this back then. And back then, and around this time, there was a lot of work being done around tobacco, but it was not the case with alcohol. So back in the mid-'80s is when the environmental prevention movement around alcohol started. And then it really kind of picked up in the mid-'90s. That's from what I've been able to see in history and reading back and talking to other folks. It was really in the mid-'90s that it really started to take off. And now, of course, it's a standard, and we have developed it, and folks have developed it over years and made it into the strategy that works in regards to alcohol. And we make sure that our work is evidence-based. Everything we do, we have to have research and information to back it up. And our areas of focus are advertising, products. We want to make sure to reduce advertising to youth, to make sure we can regulate access to products that are dangerous, especially to young people, and to low-income communities. We also are trying to make sure that we can regulate the price of alcohol, have a higher tax on alcohol, because there's evidence that shows that if you raise the tax, youth have less access to it because they're susceptible to price. And also we try to make sure that we take on the political power of the industry, because what we're dealing with now is big alcohol. It's like big tobacco, and they have a lot of lobbyists, they have a lot of power, and they have a lot of influence, and they're deregulating our system, our laws, to make it easier to sell more, to increase their profit margin. But there's a consequence to that. The more you sell, the more harm we get in our communities. So we want to make sure that there's like you do, that there's a balance in the process. And our mission, I basically kind of stated it before. We try to organize diverse communities and do policy work and advocacy work. And we're trying to make sure the alcohol companies can be well regulated. We have a specific way that we view environmental prevention. We view environmental prevention as community organizing towards policy change. So we take a more direct approach in our case, and we encourage others to do the same. And we view community organizing to be grassroots-based activism. We feel that we need to get the community organized because the community is the one that's being the most affected, the local neighborhoods. And the industry tends to focus on the power structure, the politicians, the legislators, but they really can't get to the neighborhood, you know? And that's where we have to organize. That's where we encourage people to organize and to get united to make sure that some of the liquor stores that are selling to young people or that are selling certain products can be receptive to the neighborhood, because the neighborhood is the one at stake, and the neighborhood is the one that suffers the most harm. And the way we define activism is to make people who have power do something they wouldn't willingly do unless they're confronted. The reason we have so many liquor stores in our neighborhoods is because nobody said anything, or they were not confronted and say, hey, we don't want any more. The reason we have some of the problems in deregulation is because the people in power are not aware, or they're not being informed of the harms that the products bring to the community. Or if they are, they also want to be reelected, you know. So it's kind of tough, because we know politicians that have good intentions, but at the same time, they don't want the money to go to the other candidate, right? So it's kind of challenging. So we got to make sure we organize the community to bring about the change. Before I get started with talking about the California Alcohol Policy Alliance, I want to talk a little bit about the harms that alcohol brings to California, and also talk about the industry a little bit. And if there's any questions in the audience, I would prefer that you, unless Eric has another opinion, that you raise your hand. Maybe I can answer it as we go along. Otherwise, we'll lose the conversation and discussion. So if you have any questions along the way, please raise your hand, and I'll be willing to take your questions. So we divided alcohol into 4 sections, the way it harms the community. We have illness, crime, injury, and traffic. About 6-7 years ago, we did a study that outlined the cost of this to society financially, and also in terms of lives lost and injured. And I know the CDC has, after that, the CDC a few years came out with a similar report, and they do it nationwide. So if you go to the CDC website, you can see this information in relationship to your own city and community. So what we have in California is we have about 1 person dies every hour because of alcohol. And that's due to illness, injury, accidents, assaults, homicides. So it's really at a level where it could be considered almost an epidemic. However, because of the way it happens, it's not noted as such. And the cost to government, local government and state government, is calculated at $13 billion a year. So we're talking about law enforcement cost, ambulance cost, hospitalization cost, probation, court cost. All that is the money that our government state and local spends every year trying to manage the problems that alcohol causes in our society. And that's why we never have enough funds to address the problem, because the problem is too costly. And it breaks down to, actually, I won't break it down any further, but I'll just give you that because I don't want to be wrong with statistics. But the $32 billion annually is actually a higher cost, but that includes the private sector cost. So loss of job, people not going to work, the private companies and businesses losing income because of folks not being able to perform their duties and tasks. And also the private sector also absorbs some of the costs. So actually the private sector absorbs a larger cost than the state. But nevertheless, we don't have enough money to make up the $13 billion. Because the alcohol companies only pay $350 million in taxes. So if you look at $13 billion and you only get $350 million from taxes from alcohol, there's a large disparity. So how are we going to make that up? Of course, we're going to tax tobacco, we're going to tax other things in the neighborhood, in the community, we're going to tax everything else, gas, except alcohol, because they're too influential. But I think we think it'll get to the point sometime in the next 10 years where we can't continue to absorb that cost. We can't have local governments keep spending. Los Angeles spends $2 billion a year managing this cost. I'm not sure what the cost for San Diego is, but it's probably about half or a third of that. So that's.
What was the last time California, wasn't it like 1990 that they raised their alcohol tax?
Yeah, California raised their tax in 1991, and it was 1 cent. Now, but 1 penny is a lot, actually. You can actually get about $200 million out of 1 penny because there's so much drinking going around. So it is quite a bit of money, except that penny also lost about 40% of its value because of inflation. So we have about half a penny left from that tax. And it's also not adjusted to inflation, so the tax increase, the industry made sure that it couldn't be adjusted every year to inflation. So we're actually losing every year about $200 million, or about $100 million from that penny. Which would be something that you might want to consider contacting your local legislator, state legislator, and say, hey, can we at least adjust the tax on the industry to inflation? And we would get some money. Not a lot compared to $13 billion, but it would make a difference because it would come down to our neighborhoods, our prevention efforts, treatment efforts, and hospitalization efforts. When it comes to youth, we have, unfortunately, several hundred youth pass away every year because of alcohol. Motor vehicle accidents are always at the top list because young people are healthy. They don't suffer the illnesses that we do as we get older. And in California, we found something interesting, is that a lot of the deaths that occur with alcohol are mostly associated with men, young men, and they have to do with homicides. Because young men, when they drink, they become violent. So we're losing a lot of young men to homicides because of drinking. And the cost, the private and public costs of alcohol to the state and private sector from youth drinking is $3 billion a year. And that's just breaking it down from the total of 32. Any questions? Yes.
The 1 cent increase, was that 1 cent on a dollar or 1 cent on a?
Per gallon. Per gallon. Good question. And if you want a breakdown of that, I can give you that. It's kind of complicated. Distilled spirits and beer, they get taxed differently, and wine gets taxed differently as well.
Jorge, you'll talk a little bit about charge for farm and the push that CAPA is looking at to bring back, the increase maybe up to a nickel. So that is coming in the presentation.
Yeah, we would like to build up a movement to make that take place. Unfortunately, you can't do it at the local level. It has to be done at the state. So let me talk a little bit about big alcohol. We're dealing with really powerful corporations. Let me give you some statistics in regards to them. Right now we have what we call a beer duopoly. 80% of the harms that comes to California comes from beer, not from distilled spirits or wine. It's actually beer, because it's cheaper, it's more accessible. I think the notion is that it's distilled spirits, right? They have it behind the counter, you can't get to it, but it's actually beer that is the most harmful. And 2 companies control the beer in this country. All the beers that you see at Ralph's, Safeways, at the liquor stores, 80% of that is, and also distilled spirits, if you add that, is controlled by 3 companies. They all control these products, even though they have different labels. To me, beer tastes all the same, maybe, yeah. Except for maybe craft brews, but they really taste pretty similar. They're controlled by 2 companies, and they're about to merge. They're about to become a monopoly. So we got AB InBev. They own Budweiser. They're based out of Belgium, and they're funded by Brazilian bankers. And Miller Coors, which is a merger of Coors out of Denver, or Colorado, and Miller, they're based out of England. So we got these global corporations that they're not based in the United States, but are causing all this harm and all this cost, and they're taking their money offshore, you know. And they're influencing our Constitution, they're influencing our democratic system, our legislation, and leaving behind some harm. So we gotta make sure that we try to regulate these guys. And if you look at the money they spend on advertising nationwide, AB InBev spends almost $400 million in advertising. That's more than the industry pays in taxes in California. And Miller Coors spends $300 million. So what they pay in California is what they spend in advertising, really, you know, nationwide. And they spend millions of dollars in federal lobbying, federal contributions. And in California, they spend about between $3 and $5 million in lobbying in Sacramento. Any questions about the big guys? Yes?
Actually, going back a couple slides.
Sure.
You said 80% of the harm in California comes from beer, not distilled spirits.
Yeah.
I want to make sure I got that quote right.
Yeah, it comes from beer, 80%.
It comes from beer as opposed to distilled spirits.
Yeah, the other 20 is distilled spirits and wine.
And how do you, obviously people don't get that because we still see different licensing rules for distilled spirit outlets versus just beer outlets. Are you guys pushing, because that to me seems like a good takeaway, focal point, because it's just beer. It's kind of the nationwide.
The difficulty with that is that beer, they've done a lot of focus groups, beer is seen as the working class drink. So when you try to regulate beer, you instigate a lot of animosity in the population, in the community, you know. But the best thing you can do is regulate placement, location, accessibility, and try to reduce over-concentration, because there's a link between too many liquor stores being in a community, and that includes grocery stores and Walgreens and Costco's, because they sell more than all the tiny liquor stores combined. You know, if you can reduce access to these places in the community, then you reduce violence and harm. So that's probably the best way you can manage that.
Yeah, I was going to say here in San Diego County, so, and we're not by any means prohibitionists, but here in San Diego County, we have a burgeoning craft brewing industry, and all the cities are working, very hard to bring that industry in. We're seeing it in Chula Vista, we're seeing it in the city of Oceanside right now, where they want to allow microbreweries by right, with no public hearing, in commercial areas right next to residential areas. And so any talking points or language you ever have or develop in the future on that issue, because we understand that they are an economic generator, but we also want to make sure that they don't create an excess of harm. And when you have communities that already have an over-concentration already with bars and restaurants or clubs, and then you bring in that element, it becomes a real challenge, because we see it as an economic driver, and yet we don't want to look like, we want to regulate it or work with them, but we don't want to look like we're raining on their parade as well. So it really is a challenge. I know in Oceanside, it's a huge issue right now. So any insight and any work that you guys do on that and what CAPA would be working on in the future, we'd be definitely interested, because in San Diego County, it's a huge, huge issue right now.
One of the things about craft brews, about 5-6 years ago, we were trying to raise 5 cents per beer mitigation fee in Sacramento. And that money was going to raise, first it was 10 cents, it was going to make $1.5 billion for treatment, prevention, and hospital care. It got defeated in the health committee, then we tried 5 cents, it got defeated again, it was going to bring about $800 million. And we tried to get the craft brews and we made actually exemptions for the craft brews and the small wineries. But they still would align with the big guys, you know, they still wouldn't differentiate themselves from the industry even though they're competing with the larger industry. Politically, they would align themselves with them. One of the benefits of having local production is that the owners are accountable. You can get to them, you can talk to them, they can pay local taxes. The corporations don't do that. However, some of the dangers with craft brew is that they want exemptions from the rules. They want to take away deregulation. They want to deregulate by chipping away at the 3-tier system. Does everybody know what the 3-tier system is? So the 3-tier system after Prohibition, before Prohibition, there was monopoly. If Budweiser made a beer, they would make it, drive it to the bar, and they would be at the Budweiser bar. You know, so everything was Budweiser. There was monopolies, and then you could get your haircut there. You can talk to your attorney there, talk to the preacher there. You could do all the business that you wanted at the bar. After Prohibition, they separated that system, so now the producer cannot distribute it or sell it. So now the producer is separate from the distributor and the retailer. So it protects it. It breaks down the monopoly, takes away exploitation. However, the craft brews, because they're local businesses, they want to be able to make it and deliver it. You know, they want to be able to make it and sell it. So they want to chip away at that. And there's been exemptions made. If you make under a certain volume, you could maybe distribute it or you could sell it. But the danger is that if you chip away too much, you're going to erode that system, and there's always competition. Somebody's going to come in and is going to start buying them off, and then we're going to have another problem with the craft brew industry. So I think there's dialogue to be made and to be talked to. I know there was a state bill that just passed a couple of years ago that's going to allow craft brews at farmers markets, you know, to be sold and tasted at farmers markets. So they're slowly trying to chip away, saying, hey, we're local, we want to have access, we can't compete with the big guys. Because some of the distributors won't carry craft brews because they have a contract with Budweiser or Miller Coors. So they do have something to deal with. You know, they do have challenges, but at the same time, we don't want to make it accessible and available to our community and over-concentrate an area that's already over-concentrated. You know? So it's quite a challenge that you're facing and that we face with craft brews. And this is a little bit about Diageo. They're the other company, the third company. And Diageo mostly controls distilled spirits and Guinness beer. So one of my favorite beers. Until Diageo wrote a press release attacking us and they were lying on it. So it's like, man, I can't drink it anymore. Because they're lying and they're going after us, you know. I had no problem with them until they lied. You know, I don't have a problem with being fair, you know, fair competition and lobbying and organizing, but if you start lying, then that's not nice. And they control most of the distilled spirits in this country, and they actually control 80% of the wine up in California. They already purchased 80% of the wineries, but they still look like mom and pop shops, but it's actually Diageo. You know? So that's some of the dangers that we're facing. Appearances, smoke and mirrors type situations. And the public is not aware of this, and it's difficult to make them aware of this, you know. And actually, we've been working with folks up there in Napa and Sonoma. They're having a lot of problems because people live there, you know, and they have all these tour buses coming through, drunk people on bicycle tours, people driving by schools quickly, wineries opening across from schools. So they're actually all the grapes are eroding the earth, you know, all this pesticides, there's runoff of water. So it's becoming an issue up there too, when it's overdone in that degree. And the reason we have to organize, and the reason your work is so important, is because we're facing challenges from the lobbying side of the industry. These are some of the better known lobbying institutions for the alcohol companies. The Beer Institute. It sounds like They do some really good research and analysis there. The Century Council, distillers fighting drunk driving and underage drinking. Sounds like they're trying to borrow from Mothers Against Drunk Driving, right? The Wine Institute, a voice for California wine. The really tricky one is the International Center for Alcohol Policies. I even got confused when I landed on their website. I thought they were legitimate, because they actually make it look legitimate, and they actually use data from public health. They just twist it around a little bit, They just turn it just enough so they kind of discredit it, but mention it at the same time. And I've actually talked to a lot of people that have asked me, hey, are these people legitimate? Can I use their data and information? So they're very savvy at what they do. These are the folks that are lobbying in Sacramento. When you get to the local level, they mostly go through the Chamber of Commerce or the Grocers Associations. Yes?
Kind of going back just a tiny bit with the two big alcohols not being U.S. companies, is there a lot of international trade pressure on that industry too?
And I forgot Diageo is also based out of England, the distilled spirits company. They're actually, with the new trade agreements being done right now at the global level, we're concerned that some of those trade agreements will supersede domestic law. And the industry is pushing, to have some trade agreements where they can overturn some of our California or United States regulations. And if the United States doesn't follow those, then they'll be in violation of those trade agreements. So we're concerned about that taking place, but they're very secretive type agreements. I know with tobacco, they're trying to do the same. The tobacco industry is trying to deregulate. The World Health Organization is doing great work at the international level, trying to bring attention to the harms of alcohol at a global level. So we got the World Health Organization and trade agreements going at it right now at the international front. That's a really good question. We have to keep that in mind because you also, San Diego is so close to Mexico that it always affects this region, trade agreements and type things. So what can we do at the state level to try to counter some of these forces that are affecting our neighborhoods and communities? For a long time, we've been working at the local level, and I know you guys are working, and we've been working in other parts of California, Los Angeles, Marin County, San Francisco, trying to organize at the local level. But we keep losing at the state level. We can't stop these folks. They have 20 bills every year, and maybe we'll stop one or we'll jam one up for a little bit. Last year, we were able to stop the dry bar bill that was going to allow for free tastings of alcohol at barbershops and salons. So we were able to luckily stop that one. There was going to be 40,000 new locations they could offer free booze with your haircut and nails done and hairstyle. And it was actually all promoted by one company out of Orange County. It was part of their marketing plan. But one company was going to change the whole way we deal with alcohol. And, they didn't want to apply for a license or even a permit or anything. They just wanted to give it out for free. And I know that it's being done now. And when they were interviewing the legislator who was posting this forward, I forget his name, Eric. I don't know if you remember his name. I think it might be Daly out of Orange County. But I might be wrong. He said, well, there seems to be some confusion in the law. So we want to correct it. There's no confusion. You just can't do it. You have to get a license. Because it's illegal. Otherwise, everybody else would be giving out free samples of alcohol. So this is some of the things that we're dealing with. We have to organize. We're urging people now. We're trying to create an alliance to organize and make sure that we can stop some of these bills. Because what happens in Sacramento, because alcohol is regulated at the state level, affects our communities. So we said, okay, why don't we create an alliance? Let's try to get together and unify folks throughout the state that are working on prevention and treatment. And it says, I got an idea, let's create an alliance across the land. So that's why I'm here today. I'm here with the support of IPS and Eric, who's part of the Alliance, IPS, and we're inviting the alcohol policy panel to join CAPA to unite our efforts to prevent alcohol-related harm throughout the state. And we have 5 points of unity. Yes.
Intriguing presentation here. With alcohol being such a blue-collar product, if you will, challenges, because the one with the blue collar really likes that product and
Yeah.
will defend that product. So what are some, maybe later you're going to go into some of your organizing techniques that you...
I wasn't going to go into that today, but I can. But I can, I think what we need to do is go issue by issue, bill by bill. If we have something that we're concerned about, statewide or locally, then we would just take on that issue specifically, and then we will rally around that, and then we would create the language to address it to the larger community.
I would add though that, so CAPA and alcohol justice on that issue, Ron. So when they, and we are at the slide now, when we talk about charge for harm. So Jorge, you want to talk a little bit, so they try to do charge for harm, raising the alcohol tax throughout the state of California. That was a very huge effort with the alcohol lobby, and so then you tried it in county and city of San Francisco, and it got very far. And the way that they moved it forward was they got all the data for law enforcement, medical transport, hospitalization, treatment and prevention. They got all that data and boiled it down, and then you had the entire board of supervisors actually vote yes, and then the mayor, Gavin Newsom, who owns a winery, vetoed it.
Yeah.
So it came very, very close in the city of San Francisco. Did I miss anything on that?
No, that was great. No, Eric is very well studied.
But there was literally they had every data set you could think of. Law enforcement all the way down, they worked with the hospitals, they worked with prevention and treatment, and they had a price tag on it. I mean, it was well thought out.
In San Francisco, we had an estimated, it's about $19 or $20 million, only in public health costs. We didn't include public safety costs. It would have been a lot higher. And it was going to be a 3-cent fee per drink in San Francisco that was going to supplement and replace that $19, $20 million every year. And then it was going to be adjusted every year. So we lost at the state, and at the time we could do mitigation fees at the local level. However, Newsom vetoed it, like Eric said. And then the industry, tobacco, oil, and alcohol got together right after we lost. Newsom vetoed it. We were going to come back a few months later and try it. And Los Angeles was ready. We were talking to the LA supervisors, and they were going to do a fee in Los Angeles, and that was going to bring $80 million to Los Angeles. But right after that, alcohol, tobacco, and oil got together, and they put Proposition 26 on the ballot. And they said, fees are mitigation fees, and fees are just taxes. They're disguised as, they're actually taxes. They're just disguised as fees. So they tricked the voters. We got Leonardo DiCaprio to come out and advocate at the end, because it was them getting rid of fees at the local level, because at that time the local government could vote on fees by a majority vote. It was going to not only affect the big three, but it was going to affect all fees. And I'm sure that anybody who works at city council here knows how difficult it is to raise fees now after Prop 26. So they actually passed it by a couple percentage points. That now we cannot do mitigation fees at the local level through state government, through local city governing bodies. Has to be a majority vote of the people, so you need 2/3 now. Which is interesting that you could get a proposition approved at the state level with a majority, 50, but then require 2/3 afterwards. It doesn't seem to go well. So now we can still do, but it would have to be maybe some kind of mitigation tax. But at 2/3, it's a high threshold. And there's talks about Sacramento maybe reducing that to 50% at the local level. So we would have to do legislation at the state level to readjust that, so you could do it without requiring a 2/3 vote. However, surveys show that about 80% of the population support a tax on alcohol. You know, they might not like they might not like the way you talk about their beer, but they do support a tax. It's the highest supported tax in the state. However,
I was going to add too, though, there's another way that we've seen it here in San Diego County, City of El Cajon, after Prop 26 passed the deemed approved ordinance, and the way they got around that was they had to show a benefit to the people that were paying the fee, in this case, the retailers. Now, there's not a fee in El Cajon, but if they did create a fee structure to pay for a dedicated officer just for their off-sale outlets, what they had to show is there's some sort of education component that they would be receiving in return for having to pay a fee, and that is in the form of responsible delivered sales and service training, and all the great things that the servers or the clerks would learn through that training is the way they could work around that.
yeah, so if you're going to do a fee, in that sense, a license fee, so it has to be really linked to the mitigating harm. It has to be very clear, otherwise you'll be challenged. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to raise higher taxes and fees. It's going to be a big battle, but I think it'll happen. You know, maybe it might take 20 years. You know, but you know, we can't keep paying $13 billion for 20 years. How much money is that? You know, a lot of money, right? How much money is San Diego spending? $1 billion? I don't know. You know, it's probably up there pretty high. $500 million. You know, for 20 years, how much money? 10 years? You know, that money can be going to something else. So I think it'll come a time where they just have to, under the pressure of that cost, they'll have to change the taxing and fee requirements. We also want to make ABC more effective. You know, ABC is our friend. We just have a friend that's being bullied. You know, they're being bullied all the time, and their jobs are being threatened. I've been told this. They're under pressure because they're a law enforcement agency that is very politicized because of they're under the watchful eye of the governor's office, and they're also under the watchful eye of state and assembly members, and under the watchful eye of the industry. So we want to make them stronger. We want to make sure that they get higher fees because the fee structure, it's antiquated. We want to make sure that they have more capacity to do their work. And we want to be their allies. We want to pass laws statewide that will make them stronger and make law enforcement stronger in their work. Because essentially, CAPA Alcohol will donate beer in a keg for a fundraiser of public safety, but then won't allow taxes, you know, that would supplement public safety and public health. You know, so here's some, you know, raise money for a fundraiser, this, but I'm really taking more money this way. You know, so we want to make sure to create a balance. And I know that there's a lot of disillusionment with ABC because they don't have enough staff, and they themselves are under a lot of pressure. And let's try to work together with them and make it more stronger. That's what we recommend, and that's what CAPA recommends. We also want to make sure that we can get products out of the market like powdered alcohol and alcopops because youth can be harmed by them, and also make sure that malt liquor and other dangerous products are not sold in our neighborhoods. And the last one, this one will probably take another 20 years, but we want to make sure to reduce the drinking level while driving to 0.05. Most of the world is going to 0.05, and it's a safer level in terms of the passengers and the people driving and the people who might be harmed by somebody who's drinking. I recently went to a memorial for a young girl who passed in El Cajon in December, right before Christmas. She was a friend of ours in alcohol justice, and she was 22. You know, she a nursing student. She got out of a bar, Don's Cocktail Lounge, right off the freeway, Highway 8. And less than 5 minutes, she went on the wrong way on the freeway. You know, she was probably overserved. You know, we lost a good person. And there were about 100 people in that room. And I realized, wow, you know, it takes like 100 people to raise one person in a community. And in 5 minutes, we lose them. So we really want to make sure to, I'm sure that all of you have encountered this, We want to take steps to make sure that we can reduce that possibility, so we don't lose people. And many times we talk negatively about the drunk driver, I think, or people who drink, but they're also the victims, because whether it's, overconcentration, whether it's access to alcohol when they were young, whether it's advertising, they've been conditioned and pushed in many ways in that direction. So we want to change the way that we view alcohol in our community and the way we can organize and unify to bring about statewide change.
Jorge,
Yes.
let's keep that slide up, because this is really helpful for you to take this back to CAPA, but looking at, so this is the platform of the 5 different things you guys are really working on. Obviously, number 4 is the real big push right now with powdered alcohol, but if I go down the list, I'm just curious, show of hands, what people are the most interested in. I would raise your hand on which one you locally here are the most interested in, because all of them, yes. And I'm just curious, so you can take this back to the leadership so they know. So, charge for harm. That's your number 1 thing. Okay. What about making or limiting alcohol advertising? Okay. Making ABC effective, efficient, or accountable. Eliminating products like powdered alcohol, alcohol pops. Okay, and then 0.05 saves lives. So a lot of interest in all of them, but I definitely, it looks like 2, or not all of them, definitely number 3 is big.
Yeah, ABC is big.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, ABC is big. They need our help. We really need to push for legislation to make them stronger. In Los Angeles, in LA County, they have like 6 people for the whole county.
So we actually have more. We have 7.
Yeah. And what can you imagine that workload? Yes.
What would be the legislative approach for strengthening ABC?
Well, we need to talk about it, I think. We want to raise the fees and they get more people hired. And I think we want to make sure that they're more of a law enforcement agency, and they're not under the influence of the industry. I know that sometimes we have known of ABC and the industry collaborating in legislation. And we want to make sure that they're not tied politically, their hands are not tied politically. And maybe create some type of local and state partnership where they're more responsive to the community. And we have actually Jim Mosher wrote something back in the early 90s after the civil unrest in LA. After the civil unrest in LA, 200 liquor stores were burnt down in South Central Los Angeles. There were about 400 left after that. Some of them were burned down, some of them were shut down because of legislation, but there were a lot of liquor stores in South LA. I wouldn't say 200 were burned down. There were a lot of burnt down, then eventually were about 200 were closed. They have more liquor stores there than in some states, right, in South LA. But after the civil unrest, a lot of legislation was passed that we work with now to regulate alcohol in Los Angeles. And back then, Jim Mosher, who was working at Marin Institute, wrote something about how to work and partner with ABC. So 20 years later, we can revisit some of that, because it's still relevant today. Luckily, we've made a lot of improvements, but we still have to do a lot of work in that direction. And we can keep you informed, and we can work together, maybe come up with some local ideas and some ideas from up north too, so we can correlate to see how we can make that possible.
Yeah, I think there's also an issue of ABC investigators have the lowest pay of any sworn state police officer. And so what happens is they train them, and then once they get to the training, then they get siphoned off from corrections or a different agency that pays them more. So, we have an issue sometimes, very strong here, even with our local police agencies.
Yes.
I also think some of the variances that they grant, like they don't even follow their own requirements with regard to licensing and over concentration. So I think that's an area for improvement in just strictly following their own guidelines and rules and not allowing all those variances.
Yeah, the public convenience and necessity was created to advocate for the community, but now has been turned around. Now it advocates for businesses. I think there's a gentleman back there. Yes?
I know that they're just understaffed. I know for San Bernardino County, there's only 6 officers for both San Bernardino and Riverside County. And I'm not sure if you all know, San Bernardino County is the largest county in the country, land-wise. So it's huge. There's only 6 officers for both of those counties.
Yes.
I'm just curious, on ABC, we have 2 main impacts of the agency. One is licensing and 2 is enforcement. But they kind of are counterproductive to each other, where they're issuing licenses and raising money and fees off of that. So there seems almost to be like a need to split somehow the enforcement out of that, separate, so that there's not like a conflict of interest there. So you issue licenses, and at the same time you don't have enough resources to enforce them.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I'm not sure how they're linked together, but we need to figure that out. If they only subsist with a fee, or if they have to get money from another direction, but they don't get enough money for sure. And I think it's not an accident because they've been weakened by the industry over the years. I don't think it's coincidental. Yes?
So piggybacking on what Mary just said, does CAPA have an idea or some thoughts on that whole the ABC recommendations about over concentration and then the neighboring, because it's by census tract and it's usually limited to 3 or 4. And we have some communities here that are 300% over concentrated. And then we've got neighboring census tracts that are equally over concentrated. So does CAPA have some thoughts on some strategies that might help that community problem?
Yeah, that's the public convenience and necessity, because they won't grant the license if it's over concentrated unless local government approves the licensing, right? And they do it usually through public convenience and necessity or through a zoning hearing. So we would have to create, there's something in the language, and I asked one of the previous directors of ABC about this at a meeting. I'm not going to say his name, but he was the previous one, not the current one. The current one is actually very good. He's been there a long time. He's been reaching out to the community. He seems to be pretty savvy. He's also under a lot of pressure. But the previous, I asked him, hey, because it says in the language that they may grant a license, they may deny, and we're saying, well, can you change it? Can you change it to will deny? Just change that one word. And he said, well, we can deny it, but we choose not to. They choose not to, but they can't. So how can we make them choose to deny in over-concentrated areas? I'm not sure where that pressure would come out, or if we can change that one word, it'll make a big difference.
We've had circumstances here in our county, both in unincorporated counties as well as some of our municipalities, where planning and land use has said no, where the municipality or the organization, the entity has said no, and ABC grants it anyway.
And also the local agency says that.
Yeah.
And still granted.
Oh, so there's other issues going on,
Yeah.
So in your 40,000
Yeah.
foot view
Yeah.
on CAPA, besides changing that one word, are there any other strategies that you guys see that might also be worth consideration?
I think we would have to get together, all of us. Maybe we're planning to have a CAPA statewide meeting in the next year or so, maybe next 6 to 9 months. Maybe we can have a breakout session, because there might be other places in the state that have dealt with it differently. I've heard of a place in Marin that they were going to grant a license to a movie theater, and the city council was saying no, but ABC was still going to do it anyway. So maybe there's strategies that work that we need to study and visit, and maybe there's some legal grounds that we can take, but I can't give you that answer. But we definitely want to address that. It is a big problem. You and then Brenda? Yes.
I was going to say, for your choice of words, the word must or shall is what you want. Those are the legal terms that under state law means that you have to do something. Or will, or sometimes maybe a little waffle in there. Could or should, it doesn't actually really mean must or shall.
Okay. Brenda?
Given that higher prices is by far the best way to reduce the harms of alcohol in communities, has CAPA talked about minimum unit pricing as opposed to taxes, which might be more palatable? And have you considered state legislation that would allow counties and municipalities to impose their own taxes on alcohol?
I think it would be something that we can explore. I know that they use unit pricing in Europe. I'm not sure how legal that is in the United States. Every state does it differently, so we would have to explore if it's possible. And if we want local government, the flip side to that, if we have local government gets the authority to regulate and tax and regulate stronger, then the industry could also mobilize at the local level. So you have to be very strong and locally organized to make sure you keep that and that doesn't get reduced. But it's, I think there might be a way to do a fee, but you still need a 2/3. I think the best way would be to reduce that threshold to a majority instead of a 2/3. But it would have to be a voters or revoke Prop 26. Put it back because it also affected the environmental movement. They didn't catch on to it until it was too late. So that we could do another push to revoke Prop 26. Hopefully, it won't take 2/3 to remove Prop 26. But these are strategies that we all need to consider. But if you're going to mobilize and do a tax or a fee locally, you would need a lot of funds, millions of dollars to take on the industry. Because their publicity campaign, all they have to do is bring it down a few percentage points, and you wouldn't be able to. I think the best effort that's been done so far is on the sugar side. In Berkeley, they're able to tax sugar and soda. So I think that we need to keep an eye on that movement. And actually, we were talking to them when we were doing charge for harm, and they were interested in the mitigation fee, and now they've decided to go for a tax when it comes to. So I think that's the closest thing. For a long time, we were studying tobacco, but now the sugar tax, I think it's actually a little bit more closely related when it comes to costs, financial costs, than tobacco, in terms of how we might want to approach this in the future.
I was going to add too, as much as you're educating us on what you guys are working on, I know you're now getting a good idea of what this particular county and the people that work on this issue are really interested in. And I haven't even shared this with you by way of background. ABC is having hearings across the state, and they're really looking at, it's called Rulemaking 61, and they're just looking at the way they accept protest forms, and it's really nothing different from what we've already been doing here. But what's really, I found very rewarding is that they had a hearing in Coronado, it was just 2 weeks ago, and there's 21 seats, and all 8 people showed up. It was all the folks here that work really closely in prevention, and on the record, everyone stated their concern about PCRN and all the things that we're discussing with you here. So it is documented, it's on the public record, and that's something through CAPA that I can share with you, that if folks wanted to go to these other 3 hearings across the state, they can bring that up too, and at least it's on the public record. And we know this work moves sometimes baby steps, very slow, incremental, but at least we're getting it on the record. But just know in San Diego County, you can tell the PCRN thing really is a big issue for us.
I know the director mentioned a couple of years ago that they were thinking to getting rid of PCNs. Some people use them and some people don't, and some people use them for the right way and some people don't. So and there's also talks of creating a standard PCN for the state. But some people use PCN, some people just use zoning. So it's it's different in every city and county. There's no standard. And actually, the industry was complaining about PCNs because they were saying, this is the lobbyist for 7-Eleven. In every city and county, we have to do something different. So they're upset, but they win most of the time, even they're upset. So it's quite a challenge. Yes?
How unique the institutes of higher education that are starting to train, especially when I'm thinking of the craft beers and the wineries, and having something like this presented to the professionals that are going to be the future of some of these businesses.
I think they would be receptive. There was a talk in Beverly Hills at some sports club that I snuck into once. I paid my fee and everything. And they were talking about alcohol up in LA. And somebody tipped me off on it, so I went. And it was just like you guys, a panel like this, early in the morning. It was like 7 or 8 in the morning. And there were a lot of people from the industry there. And there was a lobbyist up there saying that they wanted to get rid of ABC and create local ABCs. And they were talking about how difficult it is to get licenses and the process, and they were upset. And I handed out costs to all the tables, as he was talking, And then afterwards, people came and talked to me, and they said, "Look, we help people open up businesses that sell alcohol, but we also care about the community. What can we do? So there were people who were receptive. So I think if we start a dialogue with folks and they're aware, we might be able to create some type of a process, or at least make them aware that the product that they're selling can cause some harm. Maybe they'll contribute to correcting it. So I think there's always hope, in that direction. Unfortunately, when the attorneys get involved, they say, they're protesting your license. Don't talk to them. Just talk to me. We're going to beat this. But maybe the community has something important to say, and so that it breaks down. So I think there's always hope with folks. And when I sit across the table from the industry folks or from the lobbyists, I always try to remind myself that somebody must love them, even if it's their mother, somebody cares about them. Yeah, somebody cares about them. So I always try to make sure we're all human. We're all trying to do our best. And we can't treat ourselves as adversaries all the time. And I think people are receptive. So really quick, 15 minutes?
About 10.
10 minutes, okay. So hopefully you can join the California Alcohol Policy Alliance. And Eric is our contact. He's the Southern California, San Diego representative. And right now, there is something called powdered alcohol that we're trying to prohibit in California. Everybody knows about powdered alcohol? Okay, great. Powdered alcohol was manufactured about a year ago. There was a man out of Arizona who created this product. It's actually, people have known how to do this since the 70s. They just never made it to the market. And what it is basically like Kool-Aid. You add water to it, and you have a drink. And it comes in a small pouch like Sunkist. You put a straw in it, or you open it up and you open it up, put the water in it. And currently there's 2 bills right now in the state level, the Senate and the Assembly, trying to prohibit it from coming into California. Do you want to talk a little bit about it, Eric?
I think a lot of folks here in San Diego County know a lot about it now, because we can talk about it. And Chief Carter has an op-ed coming out hopefully very soon, and he contributes, and thanks for that. One of the big concerns we have here in San Diego County is we've done really good work on the California Healthy Kids Survey in reducing youth access to alcohol. And over the last, I think it's 16 years, the youth access rates, they asked the kids, how easy is it for you to get alcohol? And since 1999, those numbers for 11th graders have gone down by a third, and for 9th graders has gone down by a quarter. And our concern is, because this is so easy to sneak into, a concert or a classroom or any sort of venue, that those numbers would go up, and then, all it takes is mix it with 6 ounces of water, you have a very potent drink, and then even more concerning is that if you mixed it already with an alcohol beverage or alcohol energy drink, it really then, doubles the amount of alcohol. And so that's really been our big push here, and I think we had a local Assembly member, Waldron, who was very interested in this, and she's on the Assembly Government Organizational Committee, and she was one of 12 people that just voted against it on the Assembly side, and so now it goes to different steps. It goes to the Appropriations Committee on the Assembly, and then just this week, the Senate side, the Senate bill, 2 companion bills, it just went through another hurdle, and it passed appropriations. So now it's going to the
floor.
Senate.
Yeah. So the 2 bills, one of them is sponsored by Senator Huff, Republican, out of the Pomona, Orange County area. Yeah. And also Jackie Irwin out of Ventura. Ventura does great work with alcohol policy and regulation also. And it's a bipartisan bill, which is great. And this will be the first time probably, because we've read the law. There's no alcohol product being prohibited in California yet. So this will be the first time that an alcohol product will be restricted from coming into California, being sold or distributed or consumed. They did prohibit the caffeine from being mixed into the alcoholic drinks, the Four Locos, because they used to have caffeine in them. That took 4 years to regulate. And it was actually not because of the alcohol. Actually, the federal government, the FDA, can regulate caffeine. So they regulate and say we can't have caffeine mixed with alcohol. So, because there's no federal regulation on alcohol, it's at the state level. So they did the same here. So this will be added on to that. So it's a great victory if we can make this happen. This will be the first time that the community takes a stance and says we don't want these kind of products to come in. Yes?
Where is big alcohol in California in regards to how
They've actually had state neutral, and a few of them have come out and supported the prohibition of this product. We can only guess they don't want the competition, or they just want to pat us in the back for one thing and then pass another 20 bills on the other. So actually, they're not opposing, and they stayed out of it. I think it's bad publicity for them if they would come out. It just doesn't look good. You can also probably put it in baking products, and you can bake with it, and we're concerned that they might sprinkle it on marijuana. And can you imagine if they have this at every corner liquor store? And then we have to deal with it like we deal with all the other products. It'll be very difficult to regulate.
Seth, did you have a question?
I was just curious as to timing. You said it's been around since the 70s. Why now?
This gentleman who, in Arizona, I forget his name, he just started marketing. He thought it would be a good idea. Initially, he said that you could take it on hikes. Yeah. And you don't have to carry a wine bottle with you, but you have to carry the water anyway. So, and he did say things. He kind of put his foot in his mouth. He was saying things like you can sneak it into the airplanes. You don't have to buy.
Yeah, the initial website
Yeah.
really made it. They really highlighted the ease of sneaking it into venues, and it really did look like it was geared more to a youth population. And since then, they've taken all that down. But I would say that now to support this legislation to ban it's been, pretty. It's nice to see. I mean, we have all the law enforcement agencies, the State Sheriff's Association, Police Association, District Attorneys Association, California health officers. I mean, everyone's really getting behind it. So it looks like it's got, good legs and momentum. I think there's now 31 states that have banned it. 31
states, yes. California is the largest state when it comes to liquor and alcohol sales. The industry makes about $19 billion. So if California doesn't sell this product, he's going to lose a big share of his possible market. And we just don't want something like this to come to the state. So the bills are going to prohibit the sale, distribution, and consumption of alcohol. Luckily, it's not going to be made into a crime because the governor doesn't want more crime, or people going to jail. That's also very costly, keep people in there. So it's actually just going to be a fine. If it happens to get into the state and people have it, they'll get a ticket and get a fine. So we're hoping that will deter the governor from vetoing it because he doesn't like more regulation. Of course, if you bring a truckload of it, there might be different consequences.
You always have to look at the issue of displacement. And so Arizona is one state where both Assembly and State Senate passed the ban, and then the governor vetoed it, and that's where the company is.
Yeah.
So we are right next door.
The legislation does allow for industrial use. We made sure because we were working with the bill authors to draft the legislation, we made sure that if it does have industrial purposes, it might be of a benefit to the manufacturer. Because it is light, you can transport it, doesn't weigh much, so there might be some use to it aside from people consuming it. And these are some of the states that have banned it, across the country. California hopefully will be next. And we're inviting you to join CAPA. You can go to the alcoholpolicyalliance.org website. All right, there you go. Temporary bans. Yes.
The powdered alcohol, once it's mixed with liquid and transported across state lines, does it fall under Big A regulations with alcohol, or is there any even thinking about
No, that would have to be local jurisdiction, you know, if they cross it over. Like Colorado allowed it to be legal, but Colorado is legalizing a lot of things. You know, so if they go into Nebraska or Kansas, then it would be initial law enforcement. Yeah. It would probably be initial law enforcement locally, you know, if they were to get somebody on the neighboring state. I don't know what, they would have a fine there or.
Because it's powder on one side,
Yeah.
it mixed with liquid, then it becomes liquid.
Oh, I see what you mean. If they mix it before they transport it?
Before and right at the state
Ah.
line. I don't know.
Yeah.
People have done strange.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good question.
Jorge, can you go one forward now? So, and one more. So is it, you know, the lawmakers are still accepting, they like when people weigh in on the issue. And so if your organization, there are template letters that CAPA can provide you where you can send a letter to Jack Yearlin or Bob Huff and offer your support, or you can simply just go on this website and there's an online form that you can literally register your concern online, and it takes probably about a minute.
Yeah, over there on that corner, you can take action if you want to do an individual letter to legislators. You can also join CAPA on this corner, and also keep informed on what we're doing statewide and with pilot alcohol.
So any more questions or thoughts or concerns? All right. Then I'm going to have you send us off. Unless anyone's got more.
Thanks, everyone.